enters my mind.
It's Alistair.
Life's but a walking shadow. Honor, love, friends, but in their stead, curses.
Hello and welcome to the recording of this revision guide of the Shakespeare text Macbeth. Pause the video now to see how best to use this video to aid your revision. Today we're going to be talking about good old King Duncan. His castle is up in Forres, up there in the north of Scotland. We're going to be talking about, as normal, the two assessment criteria for this part of the exam. That's AO1, understanding what the play is about, and AO2, its language, its form, and of course, its structure. Here we have the tree there of the royal family in Scotland at the time, and of course Duncan is at the top there, King of Scotland, but murdered by Macbeth in Act 2. We can't really talk about any of the characters of Macbeth without focusing a little on the great chain of being. If this is a new concept to you, please pause the video now and read the information. You can see that Duncan is highlighted there in red, the word kings there appearing just a little bit above the halfway mark on the chain. King Duncan is the first human being on that chain. As king, he is the voice of God on earth. The real King Duncan reigned Scotland from 1001 to 1040 and was known as Donach al Crichain. Apologies for my pronunciation there. He is nicknamed Al Tí Lachach, or the diseased or the sick. Unlike the Shakespeare Duncan, he was a young man. But he did have a son called Malcolm who took the throne after him, and he also had a general called Macbeth. Macbeth was known as a dux, or duke, which at the time meant war leader. This meant it is likely that Macbeth was the power behind Duncan's throne. It is known that Duncan did lead an army to Moray, which was owned by Macbeth, and Duncan was killed in battle by Macbeth's forces. So yes, he was betrayed by his greatest fighter. But he was not the great king that Shakespeare makes him out to be. Now, we can't talk about Duncan without exploring the divine rights of kings. To fully understand the power of Duncan and Macbeth's position, we have to understand how the royal family was seen in Shakespeare's time. They were the undeniable voice of God. Of course, many people at this time truly believed in God, and the king being the voice of God was someone then who exhibited or displayed a great deal of power as well as influence.
Right of kings, and it's been around for a very long time. It's the concept that kings have used to claim their sovereignty directly from God, and that they are subject to no earthly authority. This idea can be traced back to ancient Aryan and Egyptian times, and has been used by many a monarch. Some even trace their ancestries back to the gods of their time to help strengthen their claim on this divine right. But the idea is also present in the Bible, Romans chapter 13 to be exact. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. The prophet Daniel also supported the theory in his book, writing, God removes kings and sets them up. Pretty serious stuff. The writings of Paul and Daniel have been used to support the idea that God is over man and the king is over man on behalf of God. It's kind of the same setup that many of us work under today. The big boss puts the manager in place, then the manager manages the staff, his people, on behalf of the big boss. Now, the king may not be the best king, but since he was chosen by God, we must obey. Moreover, the king is acting as God's regent on earth, so that gives all of his actions legitimacy, no matter what. But with legitimacy comes responsibility. The king is supposed to follow God's law and carry out God's justice. But since the king is the one talking with God, well, it can sometimes be a bit of a gray area. In the English-speaking world, it was under the reign of King James I, aka James VI of Scotland, that the theory first took hold. Over in France, Louis XIV was also pretty fond of it. I mean, if you were king, why wouldn't you be? The theory of divine right justified the king's absolute authority in both political and spiritual matters. But the 18th century revolutions in America and France kind of took the steam out of the concept, and it largely faded into the history books. But even today, the term, by the grace of God, is still part of the ruling British monarch's current title, just so all you non-kings know that God still endorses them.
In summary, then, the king gets his power from God, and so whatever the king says goes. One important thing to remember about kings at this time is that they could choose who would be the next king. It did not have to be Duncan's son Malcolm. Duncan was free to choose who he felt would be most worthy. This is why Macbeth is perhaps shocked that he was not named by Duncan after so much praise was given to him for winning the battle against the King of Norway. Where does King Duncan fit in with the themes then? Well, we know it's Macbeth's free will that destroys Duncan. We know Duncan's already king, so he doesn't have ambition, but it's a seat that Macbeth wants to take. We know at the beginning of the play, Duncan is the most powerful human being in the play, outside, of course, of the witches. And we know that potentially Duncan dies because of the supernatural, and he dies in a violent way. Some ideas then linked to King Duncan. We know he's respected at the beginning of the play. He is the most powerful person at the beginning of the play. He is humble. He spends a lot of his lines praising his lords and his servants. He is grateful for what Macbeth does for him. He is trusting to the point of being quite stupid. He is respectful. He is rewarding to the people who serve him. And he is betrayed by those same people. What does Shakespeare want us to remember about King Duncan? He was a great king at the start of the play, and Macbeth, of course, kills him while he sleeps. These are some phrases then used to describe Duncan in the play Macbeth. Shakespeare challenges us to contrast Duncan's kingdom with Macbeth's, juxtaposing the way each king rules. Duncan is the best king ever. He is sainted, he is silver. Even Macbeth describes him as having golden blood. Shakespeare makes him the perfect king, so we juxtapose him with Macbeth's tyrannical rule. Macbeth seems far worse in comparison with Duncan. What does Duncan represent? Well, Shakespeare challenges us to explore the idea of honour and loyalty, and think about what makes a good leader or a good king. Duncan first appears then in Act 1, Scene 2, and then again in Act 1, Scene 4. Duncan is about the brave Macbeth fight against the Norwegian army, and how brilliantly he and Banquo fought. Duncan is worried about his thanes. He's worried about their safety. He's wondering whether they will live through this battle with the Norwegian army. Scotland wins, and Duncan says that the traitor Cawdor's title should go to Macbeth as a reward. The traitor, Thane of Cawdor, is killed, and Duncan is sad as he trusted him a great deal. Duncan gives Macbeth the title of Thane of Cawdor. Duncan gives his son, Malcolm, the title of Prince of Cumberland, which is a sign that Malcolm shall be the next king. Duncan decides to visit Macbeth's house and tells Banquo to go with him. Duncan is far too trusting of his commanders and is overwhelmingly positive to the men who serve him. Macbeth is also his cousin and his kinsman, which implies the two are closely related. From the outset, then, Shakespeare confronts us with the close bond between Macbeth and King Duncan.
Is execution done on Cordon?
I have spoke with one that saw him die. Who did report that very frankly he confessed his treasons, implored your highness' pardon, and set forth a deep repentance. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. He died as one who had been studied in his death, to throw away the dearest thing he owed as 'twere a careless trifle.
There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. Oh, worthiest cousin, Macbeth! 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 The sin of my ingratitude even now was heavy on me. Thou art so far before that swiftest wing of recompense is slow to overtake thee. Only I have left to say, more is thy due than more than all can pay.
The service and the loyalty I owe in doing it pays itself. Your highness' part is to receive our duties, and our duties are to your throne and state, children, and servants, which do but what they should by doing everything safe toward your love and honor.
Welcome hither. I have begun to plant thee, and will labour to make thee full of growth. Noble Banquo, that is no less deserved, nor must be known no less to have done so. Let me enfold thee and hold thee to my heart.
There, if I grow, the harvest is your own.
My plenteous joys, wanton in fullness, seek to hide themselves in drops of sorrow. Sons, kinsmen, thanes, and you whose places are the nearest, know we will establish our estate upon our eldest, Malcolm, whom we name hereafter the Prince of Cumberland, which honour must not unaccompanied invest him only, but signs of nobleness like stars shall shine on all deservers. From hence to Inverness, and lodge this night with our beloved Macbeth.
I'll be myself the harbinger and make joyful the hearing of my wife with your approach.
My worthy Cawdor,
So humbly take my leave. The Prince of Cumberland. That is the step on which I must fall down, or else all leap. For in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand. Yet let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see.
True, worthy Banquo, he is full so valiant, and in his commendations I am fed. It is a banquet to me. Let's after him whose care is gone before to bid us welcome. It is a peerless kinsman.
Let's start looking at some extracts then and what we can tell about Duncan from what he says and replies to Macbeth. Shakespeare makes clear the family connections between Macbeth and Duncan. Shakespeare forces us to feel pity for Duncan, as Shakespeare uses repeated dramatic irony here, as we know Macbeth is considering killing the king after, of course, the witches spoke to him. Duncan uses phrases like worthiest cousin, sin, and more than is due, than more than all can pay. All imply that Duncan is heaping gratitude and hyperbolizing how he feels about Macbeth's responses, as Macbeth's responses are not as loving, and Duncan is almost left seeming an overly naive character. Shakespeare contrasts Duncan's loving words towards Macbeth with the natural language he uses towards Banquo. Banquo appears to react more personally and honestly to Duncan. Shakespeare has Duncan put himself down and elevates Macbeth. He is suggesting that Macbeth is far too ahead of any reward he could give. Some key quotes then from this part of the play. Obviously lots and lots of hyperbolized gratitudes here, or by hyperbolized language, as he exaggerates how much he cares for Macbeth and how much he feels he is a worthy gentleman. Duncan is the first character to point out, though, that you can't trust how someone looks. He should have learnt from his mistakes. We then see him again in Act 1, Scene 6. King Duncan arrives at Macbeth's castle. Duncan describes the castle as a lovely place, and Duncan thanks Lady Macbeth for her accommodation. Shakespeare fills this scene with dramatic irony as Duncan is describing his deathbed.
Castle hath a pleasant seat. The air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself unto our gentle senses.
This guest of summer, the temple-haunting martlet, doth approve by his loved mansionry that the heaven's breath smells wooingly here. No jutty, frieze, buttress, no coign of vantage, but this bird hath made his pendant bed and procreant cradle. Where they most breed and haunt, I have observed, the air is delicate.
Our honoured hostess, the love that follows us sometime is our trouble, which still we thank as love. Herein I teach you how you shall bid God yield us for your pains, and thank us for your trouble.
All our service in every point twice done, and then done double, were poor and single business, to contend against those honours deep and broad, wherewith your majesty loads our house.
Where's the Thane of Cawdor? We coursed him at the heels, and had a purpose to be his purveyor. But he rides well, and his great love, sharp as his spur, hath hope into his home before us. Give me your hand, conduct me to mine host. We love him highly, and shall continue our graces towards him by your leave. Hosting.
Some key ideas from this scene then, or some key quotes from this scene. The castle hath a pleasant seat. See our honoured hostess. Your majesty loads our house. His great love, sharp as his spur, hath help him to his home. Fair and noble hostess. This scene juxtaposes the dark intentions of the previous scene to emphasise his goodness, or Duncan's goodness, is being exploited. Notice he too begins to repeat the wording of the witches, the word fair there in yellow, to suggest then that more and more characters are falling under their prophecies or spell. The next time we hear about him then is Act 2, Scene 3. King Duncan is killed by Macbeth, and then Lady Macbeth plants the daggers on the servants. Macduff discovers the body and wakes the castle. Nature outside the castle is said to turn evil. Shakespeare makes the witches' fulfilment of their prophecy literally turn the air filthy, when moments ago it was once pure. How does Scotland then react to the death of Duncan? To the citizens and royalty of Scotland, Duncan's death signifies the death of a father of Scotland, God's voice on earth. It is well known that he was killed, so they would know that chaos would likely follow. His death at the hands of Macbeth is why the character is so important in the place. Now Macduff discovers the body first. He shouts horror repeatedly as he's in shock and believes that this is a murder against God, a sacrilegious murder. He can hardly speak. Lady Macbeth is next to react. She's overcome by grief and cannot believe it happened in their house. She faints soon afterwards. Banquo doesn't believe what he's hearing and believes Macduff is actually lying at first. Macbeth finds out and makes it clear he was blessed by Duncan's life. He tells the crowd that all good things are gone, now Duncan is dead. Malcolm and Donalbain react calmly and very quickly decide their lives may be in danger and decide to leave. Duncan is the representative of God on earth, ruling by divine right, ordained by God, a feature of kingship strongly endorsed by King James I, for whom the play was performed in 1606. This divinity of the king is made clear on several occasions in the play, most notably when Shakespeare has Macbeth talk of the murdered Duncan as having silver skin laced with golden blood, Act 2, Scene 3. In the play, Duncan's death signifies the death of someone pure and innocent and good. The importance of royal blood, that is, the inheritance of the divine right to rule, is emphasised when, in the final scene, Duncan's son Malcolm takes the title of king with the words, by the grace of God of grace we will perform. This suggests then that Macbeth's rule is more or less a demonic rule that is not endorsed by God, whereas when Malcolm becomes king again at the end, it's like God's chain of being is now back on track where it should be. Darkness in Scotland. Before and after Duncan's death, Shakespeare confronts us with a Scotland whose natural beauty is tearing itself apart as the chain is disrupted. This confronts us with the fact that Duncan was the parent of Scotland, and without him, it's wild and untamed. This juxtaposes the serenity and calmness of Macbeth's castle when he was alive. We have got quotes like, "The night has been unruly," "Our chimneys were blown down," "Strange screams of death," "The earth was feverous and did shake," "The clock 'tis day and yet dark night strangles," and "A falcon was by a mousing owl killed." All of these suggest then that nature has gone wild and untamed after Duncan dies. We're then told that Duncan's horses, bounteous and swift, are minions of their race, turned wild in attire, broke their stalls flung out, contending against obedience, as they would make war with mankind. And then we're told, "'tis said they did eat each other." So this then is a description of Duncan's very steeds, his horses, literally cannibalising each other after Duncan dies. All of these images confront us with a Scotland rebelling against the unnaturalness of regicide and represent the destruction of the natural order. The most vivid of these is the death of Duncan's noble horses, who represent a once powerful and strong Scottish nobility, who will now turn on each other now their father is dead. What does Shakespeare want us to think? Shakespeare presents Duncan as a noble, true king, who is liked and respected by all. He is there at the battlefield, supporting his warriors at the start, and repeatedly showers praise on those he loves and trusts. It is this trust that is his hamartia, or tragic flaw. He doesn't recognise a traitor when he sees one, and is blinded by his own trust and goodliness. Yet he is yet another character there to contrast with Macbeth and his evil, his ambition and his selfish ways. On the screen now then, you're going to see 3 screens filled with 3 important quotes to remember about the character and their explanations. Please freeze the screen now and make notes. And then the middle of the play. and then when Duncan's dead. We're now going to move on to look at some essay skills then. As normal, we're going to follow the current plan. We have a short overview, then the start of the extract, middle of the extract, and then what's changed, of course, by the end of the extract. Where is the start, middle, and end? Well, that's totally up to you. Just divide it roughly equally, so it's the same number of lines for each bit. Here's then an example of a conversation between Ross and an old man. Overall, this scene is important as it represents the results of King Duncan's murder, and Shakespeare makes clear how the breaking of the chain of being causes chaos.
10 I can remember well, within the volume of which time I have seen hours dreadful and things strange. But this sore night hath trifled former knowing.
Ah, good father, thou seest the heavens, as troubled with man's act, threatens his bloody stage. By the clock 'tis day, and yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp. Is night's predominance, or day's shame? The darkness does the face of earth entomb, when living light should kiss it.
'Tis unnatural, even like the deed that's done. On Tuesday last, a falcon, towering in her pride of place, was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed.
And Duncan's horses, a thing most strange and certain, beauteous and swift, the minions of their race, turned wild in nature, broke their stalls, flung out, contending against obedience, as they would make war with mankind.
'Tis said they ate each other.
They did so, to the amazement of mine eyes that looked upon. Here comes the good Macbeth.
As you can see, I've begun to highlight the quotes I might want to use in the extract. The ones in red are probably some of the best ones that are used there, and the ones in green are perhaps the ones I'd want to analyse in more detail. In short then, the ones in red might be a one-sentence response, maybe a PEE paragraph, and the ones in green are the ones that I'd want to really go into some depth with. Why is Shakespeare using that language? Why does he use enjambment in the place that he does? Why does he use these particular effects or these particular techniques to get across the meaning of the darkness of Scotland at this point in the play? There are two approaches to evidence that need to be used here. PE paragraphs and longer analytical petal paragraphs. That's where I zoom in on individual words and comment on techniques being used. You've already heard my overview. That would take about 3 minutes to write, saying why the scene's important. You can see underneath there about 7 minutes worth of writing as I explore the beginning of the scene you've just heard. From the outset, the old man is scared that he'd never seen days like this before in his lifetime. The quote, "hours dreadful and things strange," challenges us to believe that the world has now become supernatural because the world appears filled with death. The quote, "sore night," personifies the night as if it's in pain, suggesting to us that Scotland is hurting because of the murder of Duncan. The word "sore" suggests an ache or a pain that is long-lasting, yet slowly fades, that prevents movement, implying the pain that Scotland feels will last while Macbeth is on the throne. The word "trifled" implies the old man views this pain as something that makes the rest of his life insignificant. But how do I write each quote in the time limit? 20 minutes to do it. Well, if you look closely at my response there, you can see that some of the quotes I've done in a sentence with the word "because," briefly explaining them, and others I've spent a bit more time on. The part in green there is where most of my grade would come from. I'm using a quote, I'm mentioning a technique, personification, and I'm zooming in on the word "saw" and explaining why that particular word was used. Now, there's two errors that normally occur there in a student's work. Sometimes students just simply go, the quote, and then immediately zoom in into a word without explaining it. On other occasions, when students do zoom in on a word, they don't really explain the individual word. They just give me quite a general answer about the whole quote. It's important with your key quotes, that is the 3 main ones in green, you do explain the whole quote first, then zoom in on a particular detail. That's what they're looking for to achieve the much higher grades. You can see then, I've talked about the whole opening and sum it up in a sentence. I've taken the first quote and explained it in one sentence, making sure I've explained it. I've then zoomed in on a particular detail using something much more like a whole paragraph. And lastly, I go back to my short explanations again by the end, as I realise that I've got to get through a certain number of quotes in the time limit and explain them as quick as I can. You can see there in pink the key phrases I've used in my response. From the outset, challenges us to, because, suggests to us, the word, suggests, implies to us. All the kind of sentence structures the exam board would expect to see in order to give you those higher grades. Words like challenges us imply then that you're not going to tell the examiner the blindingly obvious, you're going to tell them how you really were affected by a quote and what that really made you think about according to who said it and what's happening in the play at the time. Here's then the middle of the extract, and I've already highlighted there the quotes for you and begun using sentence structures to channel your response. As the extract develops, Ross exaggerates the tension as he compares Macbeth's night with Duncan's heaven. The quote, good father, suggests to us. The quote, man's act, line space, threatens the bloody stage, confronts us with. The word strangles implies. The quote, darkness does the face of earth entomb, gives us an image of. Finish these sentences then to give yourself a middle paragraph to your essay at this point. Can you do that though in 7 minutes you'd have in the time in the exam? And then lastly, I'd look at the end of the extract. By the conclusion of the extract, we are shocked to find. Look at the quotes I've highlighted in red, explain those in a sentence, then go to the quote I've got in green there, and try and explain some individual words of that quote in green to zoom in and prove analytical skill. Once you've done that section of the test, you know then that you're going to go on to 1B, write about the way the theme of responsibility is represented in the play. Obviously this is an example of the question, but certainly 1B will ask you to look at the whole play rather than just one page of it. The exam board give you 2 handy bullet points there to remind you what you're assessed for. You've got to refer to the play as a whole, and you've got to show your understanding of characters and events in that play. Now, the original extract was broadly about responsibility, how Duncan's death then leads to a lack of responsibility in Scotland. Well, in this case, obviously it doesn't mention a character in this question, so you can pretty much talk about whoever you like, as long as it links to the theme of the question. In my response, then, I'd follow pretty much the same structure. I'd start with a brief overview. I'd then spend about 10 to 15 minutes talking about the start of the play, then how Shakespeare develops the theme by the middle of the play. That again would take about 10 minutes to write, and then what Shakespeare says about the theme of by the end of the play. My whole essay then should be about 40 minutes long, and making sure that I keep clock watching to make sure I hit that time limit. For the theme of responsibility then, I could easily look at Macbeth and Macduff, or I could focus on Macbeth and Banquo, or of course I can comment on what this video is about, Macbeth and Duncan. The exam board wouldn't really mind, but with a question based on responsibility, I'd expect the student probably to talk about more than one character. I'd look at one of these pairs, rather than lots of them, or equally just Macbeth alone. Here then is my essay itself. You can see the quotes there highlighted in red, and I've followed the same structure as I just suggested. I've got some short quotes there, only explained in a sentence, and then I've zoomed in on particular quotes too, to have a look at a quote and then look at individual words used within it. Please pause the video, make notes on this essay, and see if you can then write it from those notes alone. Then replay the video, look back at the original essay, and see what went well, and equally what you could still improve upon. This then is my middle paragraph, and then my last paragraph with a sort of mini conclusion on the bottom. Thank you then for listening to this revision guide to the Shakespeare text Macbeth and the character of Duncan.